guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Anna, clinical psychology doctoral candidate. On this channel we talk about real life applications to psychology, so hit like, subscribe if you haven't already. Today we're talking about the core of anxiety and its antidote. Little disclaimer, this is not meant to fix anxiety magically. There is no such thing. This is more so just a few cognitive exercises to get you to decatastrophize and also to give you some perspective on the way you think about anxiety. And this is in no way meant to substitute therapy, so if you have an anxiety disorder or you just want to go to therapy, I highly recommend that you go. So let's get started. When we talk about anxiety, I feel like there are two different types. There's anxiety about a specific thing, like snakes, public speaking, etc. And then there's anxiety about the uncertainty of the future. So today we'll be talking about the latter. The former is important too. If you want in on a little secret, the antidote to that type of anxiety is just exposure, but that's not what this video will be about. We'll be focusing more on fear of uncertainty and fear of the future because it's uncertain. So at its core, I feel like anxiety about uncertainty of the future is just, and secondly, if it does, it will make your fear come true. Most of us have heard of the placebo effect, but there's also the nocebo effect, which is the exact opposite. It's when you think a bad thing is going to happen, and so that bad thing does actually happen because the mind is a very powerful thing and it can elicit and change our circumstances. In a sense, it's a type of self-fulfilling prophecy. You might fear that you're going to be such a terrible leader at this new job, and you start to behave in such a defensive way where your peers start to not like you. They start to think that you're actually not a good leader, and then boom, your prophecy is fulfilled. The bad thing actually did happen and you were the architect of creating it. Oftentimes, people with illness anxiety, previously known as hypochondria, also tend to experience the same thing. Someone might be perfectly healthy, but they fixate on specific symptoms, and suddenly that can actually cause actual physical illness. For instance, if you are fixated on your hairline and you think, oh my goodness, I think it's thinning, you might actually stress yourself out to the point where your hair actually does start to fall out. Also, the relationship between the immune system and stress is very well corroborated. We know that the more you're stressed out, the more your immune system's down. So for instance, if you are very, very scared of contracting a disease, that stress is going to lower your immune system, going to make you more prone to diseases, ulcers, the list goes on. Fear of abandonment is another really great example. You fear being abandoned, so you might behave in ways that cause you to actually be abandoned by the other person. We shouldn't freak out about the future because it probably won't change what's going to happen, and if it does, it's going to change it for the worst. But how do we stop freaking out about the future? First, I want you to figure out the worst case scenario of what you're scared of. Once you have that, once you have pinpointed the worst thing that could happen, the worst thing that you're scared of in this moment, imagine the best case scenario, and just bear with me. What's that best case scenario? And after you've done that, find the midpoint between the two. What is the midpoint between the worst case scenario and the best case scenario? And after you've done that, waiting to make sure you've done it, we'll call this midpoint the most realistic case scenario, statistically speaking. Now you may be wondering, but I think the worst case scenario is actually the most realistic. To which I ask you, why are you automatically assuming that? That is not the most realistic case scenario, despite your mind trying to convince you of it. Maybe the worst case scenario has happened for you in the past, but that doesn't mean it'll happen in the future as well. So once you've identified the most realistic case scenario, assume that that is what is going to happen. It might not always be true. Sometimes it might be closer to the best case scenario, sometimes it might be closer to the worst. It does not matter. We cannot operate as if the worst thing is going to happen. And if you're struggling to believe that most realistic case scenario, put your thoughts on trial. What evidence does the prosecution versus the defense provide? So the prosecution being, this thought is not true, this thought is telling you a lie. The defense being, this thought is absolutely true. What is the evidence for both? Because you may find there's actually not a whole lot of evidence to support the idea that this bad thing is going to happen. If you look at things like historically what has happened, or if you look at what the facts of the situation say, you might find you're actually catastrophizing. But here's the true antidote to this type of anxiety in my perspective. Know that even if the worst possible thing happens, you will be able to handle it. In essence, what we're doing here is decatastrophizing. I recently read Man's Search for Meaning by Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a Holocaust survivor and a psychologist who created something called logotherapy, which is the therapy of finding meaning. And he spoke about the wonders that the human mind and body can endure and tolerate. I mean, if you think about what he's gone through, it's absolutely stunning what humans can tolerate, what humans can survive. And he talks about how there are 3 ways to find meaning in your life: by creating a work or doing a deed, such as making art or working or volunteering; by experiencing something or encountering someone, such as enjoying beauty, looking at nature, experiencing love; or by taking a resilient attitude towards unavoidable suffering. Essentially, what today we call distress tolerance. It's the same reason why I love gratitude as a mental health exercise, because no matter how bad things get, the human mind can always find something to be grateful for. Frankl mentioned how even at the concentration camps, the beauty of nature and music was augmented. It became fiercely intense despite of the horrible conditions that he was going through. No matter how bad someone has it, there is always something to be grateful for. And so there is almost nothing in this world that you cannot survive. Lose your job? What is that worst case scenario? You go on unemployment for a while, you're still able to work on your self-improvement during that time, you have meaningful relationships still, you enjoy your hobbies, and eventually you find another job. It is not the end of the world. You get dumped? Maybe the worst case scenario there is this was the person for you and it'll be really hard to get over them, but eventually you'll forget about them, maybe even meet someone else who's a really good fit for you. Lost all your friends and were shamed by society? Worst case scenario, maybe you live alone, but you start to enjoy solitude, you invest in creativity, you're still able to live off of your wage, you're still able to meet new people somewhere new. Again, even if you lose almost everything, you can still rebuild and there will still be things to be grateful for. And again, it's not that these worst case scenarios are going to happen. It's just an exercise to help you realize that even if they do happen, you will still have something to live for and your life will go on and you'll probably be even stronger than before. Frankl talks about transforming a personal tragedy into a triumph. He also talks about how there's one thing no one can take away from you, and that is your attitude towards your circumstances, what he calls inner or spiritual freedom. And so just to review what we talked about today, anxiety about the uncertainty of the future is caused by assuming the very worst will happen and feeling like you cannot handle it if it does happen. Cognitive challenging, such as putting your thoughts on trial, can help you realize that these are not true assumptions. Decatastrophizing, or realizing that your worst case scenario is not that bad, but it's probably not going to happen anyway, can also stop you from freaking out about this. There will always be something to be grateful for or to find meaning in. No matter what happens in the future, your attitude is the only thing that can never be taken away from you, and with a good attitude, you can survive almost anything. So I hope this video helped some. I know it's a pretty simple concept, but it has a couple techniques in there that I hope should help some of you struggling with anxiety. If this was helpful for you, please interact with the video. I would really appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.